everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Osborne Group Chat. My name is Laurel McCombs. I am Senior Advisor with the Osborne Group. I'm joined today by my colleague, Bob. Hello, Bob.
Hey, Laurel.
We are, for those of you who saw our last chat, and if you have not, please go check out our blog at theosbornegroup.com. We did a blog post just recently. Bob and I are on a roll. We are going to be try to be much better about these chats and blogging and sharing our thoughts with you out into the world. Well, we recently did a chat where we talked about taking stewardship beyond thank you and why it's so important to focus on impact and focus on engagement when we're doing our stewardship and not just focus on gratitude and perhaps maybe an overemphasis on gratitude and an overemphasis on thanking our donors has maybe led us to not be very engaged with our donors and maybe is some of the cause for our retention crisis that we find ourselves in. I also think, as Bob and I were wrapping up the chat and we kind of went off recording and we're just talking about things. The other thing that we talked about was the implications of this on a lot of the work that we're all doing around racial justice and equity. And one of the things Bob and I have said a lot over the last few years is that in many ways, the work that really important groups like community-centric fundraising and others are doing around kind of having this conversation about what does it mean to represent social and racial justice, equity, inclusion into our fundraising work is really about doing good fundraising. That there isn't a lot that in these principles or in these things we're talking about that is radically different from what I think we would have considered really good fundraising before. And I think now that we're having this conversation about gratitude, we were like, this is such a great example of how we shifting our fundraising practices to be just better practices is also making this more inclusive, more equitable. It's going to help us to engage a more diverse and more varied group of donors in new and exciting ways. And so we thought we would come and chat with you all about that today. So Bob, I would love to just kind of send it over to you to get your initial thoughts on this topic and what's top of mind for you.
Yeah, thanks, Laurel. So yeah, I agree with you. I don't think that some groups like community-centric fundraising are saying anything that's really different from, again, what we would have considered really good fundraising and what we've been talking about for a long time. But I do think that the framing, how we frame it, maybe matters and maybe has some larger implications for the culture. And I think that's a really interesting part of that work. And I think your framing and talking about, gratitude is really interesting from that same perspective, because so on the positive side, right, it's communicating impact and engaging donors. On the negative side, if we have kind of this, if we think that the basis of this work is gratitude, then we have to be grateful, right? And we have to treat our donors, not be accountable to them, right? And just tell them, here's what your money did and here's the implication of it. But like, we're petitioners of their gratitude. And at its worst, I think it makes us run concierge services where we're doing all this extra work for donors. I think it puts us in a place where the dynamic is one where we are the donor holds all the power just because we're just grateful that they're bothering to extend their gratitude to our organization. And so I think to not think about it in the framework, that framework is to maybe create bad fundraising as opposed to just not be doing good fundraising, but like taking racial justice and equity out of it, taking all of it, just bad fundraising practices that also result in a lack of equity and other issues. And so I think that's what's really interesting to me about it, among other things, is just like when you and I look at the worst excesses of fundraising and just how we just let donors just do whatever they want and run the show. And when we see that, it is because of that framework, right? It is because that's how we're thinking about it, as opposed to us being in a partnership and in a working together towards trying to achieve some kind of impact. So I think it's a slightly different way of framing some of the ideas that are out there. But I don't think, while I think a lot of groups have looked at community-centric fundraising, like I said, yeah, we need to be more equitable in our fundraising practices. We need to embrace anti-racism, or at least take racial justice and equity into account as we think about our fundraising practices. I don't know, that people have switched away from that gratitude mentality, and maybe we won't see the change we want until folks do. So that's
Absolutely.
my opinion.
Yeah, no, such great points. And I also just there's so much chicken and egg about this for me. There's so many things that we do or we've always done in fundraising that I think, is this what donors want, or did we just start doing this because we thought it was what donors wanted, and then now it's just how we do things? I take end of year giving as a massive example, right? I think, okay, if a third or something of all giving is made in the last like 3 months of the year, and a quarter is made in December, something crazy like that, right? I think, well, is that because people really are giving more then, or is it because that's when we're asking more, right? Like, there's a chicken and egg in that for me, and it's probably a little bit of both, like everything in life. And with this, there's so many things that we do with donors, like this whole gratitude piece, and saying thank you 100 times, but never demonstrating impact, that I think, did our donors tell us that that was what we wanted? And I think one of the things that, CCF and others have brought up some really important, points about saviorism, and kind of, donors having a real saviorist complex. And I think, do they, or did we make them that, right? Like, I have no doubt that there are donors out there who are just not great people and expect a lot for very little, and put us in terrible positions. We have whole trainings about dealing with folks such as that. But I think they are the exception to the rule. Like, I am such an optimist, right? I am laurel glass overflowing, that I really believe that most people are really good and have really good intent. I think sometimes because we are so grateful, and we are, our language has kind of pushed this white saviorism piece. And, I think about some of the organizations I've worked with over the years, and I think, we chose to frame this like this as the organization. The donor didn't ask us to do that. And so I think there's more of this that's in our control than we think there is.
Yeah, I would agree with you 100%. I mean, I think when we've gotten clients to switch, away from that, just thanking people, more to impact, it helps their fundraising. It doesn't hurt their fundraising. It makes a big positive difference. And there are people who really want the recognition and are doing this for the wrong reasons, but I would say that's 1% of the people. Although I think there's a perception that it's much more than that. When we look at stewardship programs, the percentage of the stewardship program that is focused on recognition, which I would put thank you is within that category, versus impact reporting and accountability, it tends to skew more than I think you and I would like towards the recognition. So I think we do put ourselves in that position because we think that's what people want, but most recognition is not motivational, right? Like, I'm still out the money, so I'm really only going to give you money if I really am making a difference, because I don't need to spend a lot of money just to make myself feel good. Like, there are people who want that, and I want to feel that. I do want to feel good, but it's not the reason I'm making, that might be the reason I give you $50. It's probably not the reason I'm giving you $10,000 and giving multiple organizations that kind of money. So I think recognition and gets overplayed. And then to the white saviorism, I mean, I think, it was easy, right? It plays into tropes that exist already. It plays into society in a way that works, but and not in a, you know, it works or it has worked because it's how folks think about things, unfortunately. But it doesn't have to be that way. Like, there's nothing out there that makes me think that if we did things differently, that we wouldn't have the same or better results. So I think, you know, I think you're right. You know, I think this orthodoxy that we've created for ourselves and haven't really questioned it, because up until pretty recently, things were humming along, you know, and at least from a, you know, institutional philanthropy standpoint, and people were making money, and we didn't see any reason to change, even though, you know, people like you and I and some of the organizations that we work for may be secretly grumbling about it. You know, you and I have talked about this before, like up until 2020, and maybe to some extent me too, some of the things we're talking about, there was absolutely no market for. Like, nobody wanted to hear this, nobody wanted to talk about it. And, you know, there was just nowhere to go with this. And now there is. So I think it's a interesting framework. And I think you're right. It'll be interesting to see where things go from here.
Yeah, it's I think about this too a lot with events. I think this is the other thing that's been on my mind. Again, I've always had pretty strong feelings about events and kind of the way we utilize events in or don't utilize events particularly effectively. And I'm always reminded, I was doing work with a university, and I was in conversation with a dean, and one of the deans at this university just said, "Laurel, can you explain to me why we throw our donors proms?" I started cracking up, and I said, "You know what, Dean, I don't know that I'll ever be able to answer that question. After 20 plus years in this business, I still don't understand why we throw our donors proms." And as somebody who, you know, is part, you know, who does love a good, you know, philanthropy event, you know, I think when I think about just giving in general, when I think about people who either are giving by coming to your events, giving to you through any other means, I think about Giving Tuesday coming up, you know, a lot of these ways that we kind of engage and acquire new donors, especially, I think, you know, yeah, there may be reasons why we kind of get people to come in the first place. Unfortunately, we don't then, through our stewardship, really try to convert them into being mission-based, vision-based donors. And I think on some level, I think donor acquisition is a topic for another chat. I think donor acquisition is about to go through a pretty significant reckoning when we look at kind of the ineffectiveness of direct marketing, much past the boomer generation, and, you know, kind of whether or not social media has really proven itself to be an effective acquisition tool. You know, I think because acquisition is about to go through a fairly significant reckoning, it also, I think it lends itself to being part of this conversation about, okay, so once we acquire people anyway, shouldn't we be doing something a little bit more interesting with them? I just see so many folks who, you know, kind of do what they've always done. They go out, they acquire new donors through events, they acquire new donors through direct mail, and then they stick them there forever. And they never try to engage them. And again, I know we want to have a whole nother conversation about the role of engagement in all of this, and you know, what it means at all donor levels to actually have people doing things, right, and being part of our organizations. And I think let's start with stewardship. Let's start with the way that we communicate impact, the way we engage folks of all giving levels, regardless of how we acquired them. How are we moving them into being part of our organization, not kind of siloing them to just continue to get the same solicitation every year? That was a little bit of a
I love it. So one, we should do a chat on the acquisition, because I think what you're suggesting, and I think you're right, is maybe what's genuinely a paradigm shift in fundraising. And I love that. I think it also dovetails very nicely with the push towards racial justice and equity in fundraising, because what I'm hearing is that those are not separate, and maybe we've been thinking about them separately. Like, this is good, we're looking at our fundraising practices and applying more racial justice and equity to them, which is great. But maybe the thing that solves, the grand unification theory of all of this, right, is a move away from this generosity model that will, where folks just, we assume they're just giving, charity, right? That's what we're really saying, as opposed to impact, and because they're engaged, because they want to see something different in the world. They want, and frankly, want the world to run differently, maybe than it actually does. And so those all are striking me as very related, and not like just shifts in and of themselves, and kind of tinkering with the model, right, and just doing the model better, as opposed to like maybe really rethinking. I don't know that our practices, I think for good fundraising is good fundraising, but maybe shifting how we think about it will create less bad fundraising. and that would be very worthwhile, I think, in and of itself. Just, we could just see, I mean, as consultants, maybe we shouldn't wish for this, but but I think as people who believe in a better world, I will welcome a move away from bad fundraising. So I think it's an interesting point that we may be in, and maybe the solution to all the things we're grappling with is this shift.
Well, and it really makes us question everything we do, right? It makes us question the communications we send out. It makes us question the types of stewardship events we have. It makes us question the people who are on our board, who are the ones who are stewarding our donors. It really kind of makes us think about, if in fact what we're trying to do is build a supporter base, right? A community of people who are engaged with our organization, love what we're doing, are engaged on a lot of different levels, not just giving their money, but maybe giving of their time, maybe giving of their intellectual capital, or whatever else they might want to give. How does that make us rethink just everything that we do? And I challenge people to, every piece that you're about to put in the mail or send via email, really look at it. And can you tell me if it really tells me anything besides just thank you so much? And does it really tell me what my gift is accomplishing? And you mentioned on our last chat, a lot of the research that came out a couple of years ago around giving from diverse communities, and that many communities give in non-traditional ways. I think at the time you and I both pondered whether or not that was because a lot of communities of color have always kind of been left out of traditional philanthropy, and so we've kind of been forced to give in other ways because traditional philanthropy wasn't coming to our communities and asking us to give, and so we found other ways to have impact on our communities, right? I think it's how these two conversations are tied is so significant, right? Because and again, like we talked about in our last chat, all of the data that says that the number of donors giving to traditional philanthropy is declining, the number of dollars is declining, and I think we've got to own that. We've got to say maybe some of this is our fault. I again don't think people are being less generous. It's not about some kind of generosity crisis in America, right? Like, I think people are still generous, but they're realizing they don't have to be generous through a traditional 501c3 nonprofit structure, right? That there are lots and lots of ways to be generous and see impact in their communities. So we have to step up our game.
Yeah, I think you're right, and that's maybe a good note to end on. I think it'll be really interesting to see as these ideas are explored where things go, because if these trends continue, it's a problem for our sector, and so we do have to think about what does this mean for us, and how do we rethink how we're approaching philanthropy, and how we are approaching creating impact out there in the world, because there are lots of different ways to create impact. You know, there's through government, there's through the corporate sector, there's it doesn't have to be through 501c3s. I mean, frankly, in the world, the United States not-for-profit system is pretty unique. There's nothing that says it has to be the way it is, right? It's the world we've created for a variety of different reasons. It's the tax code we've created through a variety of different reasons. And and it's not something that necessarily has to stay the same. So I'm looking forward to continuing to talk about this and talk about, you know, the implications that it has. I think we should talk. I think next time we should talk about acquisition. That's a fun topic.
Yeah. And I you know, not that I have a crystal ball, but I have lots of curiosities and you know, anyway, we'll talk about that another time, and we hope you'll join us when we have that conversation. As always, thank you so much for joining us. Please reach out if Bob or I can be of help to you in your stewardship and your fundraising. You can find us at the osbornegroup.com, and we just welcome you to come have this conversation with us and share how this is all going in your organization. And we'll wish you a wonderful rest of your day and talk to you soon. Thanks.
Bye.